hey Tony, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Well, it's brilliant. Okay, so the quick first question that I ask all the guests is, how do you like your coffee in the morning?
Black, no sugar. Always
Brilliant.
black, no sugar.
I started this question expecting, and I say this every episode now, I was expecting people to say similar things to me, maybe like a latte, something milky, builders, like a builder's coffee.
Yeah. I'd
No,
love to.
the
I'd
common
love to.
theme is black, a black coffee.
I'd love to, but I'm allergic to milk.
Hey, welcome to the crew. We got fellow allergy. I like
Oh yes.
it.
Yeah, there's lots of allergies in this household. It's terrible.
Oh,
Food shopping is a bit of a challenge in this household.
oh, I feel you. We could do a whole episode on that and the trials and tribulations of families with
Yeah,
allergies.
exactly,
But I
exactly.
want to talk about you and your business and what you're doing. And one of the things, so usually in these podcasts, I do start to avoid to bring up the conversation about COVID and the effects of COVID because it gets a little bit laboured. Because what we're talking is like four years on now.
That's right.
And I usually think there's a point where it's like we've got to keep moving forward. But for you, I think it's pertinent to the
Mm.
conversation and also what is happening in the marketplace at the moment that is, I think, really is going to truly affect businesses now. Um, like from now, like it's in full adoption, but I definitely think even in the next 5 years, it's going to have a greater impact. And
Yes.
so, Tony, what is your business? And there's three parts to this. What is your business? Why do you do your business? But more importantly, when did you start your business?
Okay, so my business is Cosmos Currency Exchange. We help clients move funds from one bank account to another bank account involving an exchange of currency. And we can send monies to and receive monies from over 50 countries around the world, involving over 35 currencies. There are loads and loads and loads of currency brokers out there. The world is not short of currency payment solutions. Okay, you've got the banks, you've got the online brokers, sorry, you've got the apps at the end of your fingertips on your mobile phone. So what would persuade somebody who's been around a while, as you can see from the hairstyle, who had a 35-year corporate career, half of it in the City of London, to launch his own brokerage in January 2020. My timing was impeccably bad because I launched, and 6 weeks later, what is called the first lockdown in the UK. The first of three lockdowns in the UK. And so the first year was the first year of any business is challenging, but that was impeccably bad timing on my part. But there you go.
I mean, in fairness, like I've had the luxury this year of really talking to lots of different people from around the world, and I like to ask them like what their experience was. And so, for context for those people, in January 2020, I vividly remember the conversation with my doctor friends at the time. They were saying this thing called COVID is going to come and it's going to be big and it's going to be massive. And I remember at the time, like how big can this be? Because you got to remember as well, the context was we had things like swine flu, Ebola. Oh gosh, I can't remember a couple of
MRSA,
MRSA,
SARS.
like SARS. There was a series of different of these. They were coming through every year and saying like there was a lot of scaremongering about them, but because nothing really ever came into like a mass population effect in the UK. It was then when COVID came, there was that also attitude of, oh, it's just like all the other stuff. We can be fine. It'll be okay. Maybe some people will be affected, but it won't really change our day-to-day life in the UK. So then by the time March came around and there was a
Yeah,
lockdown, that was like, what is this?
yeah,
So to fairness to you, in January, why there was no
yeah,
reason if you looked at the market and you looked at previous past
yeah.
evidence, why would I not set up this business?
Yeah.
Why would I not
I
go
mean,
ahead with this?
2019 was an excellent year.
Oh,
It
fantastic.
was a great year. And yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Thinking about it now, when you think about it, this country never even locked down during either World War.
Yeah.
So it wasn't something that was even a possibility.
No.
And we've heard of SARS and everything else coming out of China and what have you. So again, so it's flu season. So what? It makes no odds. But boy, did it make a difference to everybody's lives.
So absolutely. So we fast forward. We do get into lockdown, and one of the things that you did say to me is sometimes what could be seen as an absolute disaster spawns out opportunity that you wouldn't have even dreamt of. So what was that opportunity then from you having started a business around the lockdown and COVID period?
Yeah, it was really, really interesting how things work out sometimes. I guess, like the old Chinese, we've been mentioning China, the old Chinese proverb of, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. It is so true, because at the end of the day, it's very easy to get overawed with the amount of information available out there, with all the different factors, going from the transition of having a 35-year corporate career to all of a sudden running your own ship. And I always worked at the top end of industry, so I always had big organizations with big marketing departments and business development and this department and that department. And then of course you launch and you look around and it's me, myself, and I, and you think, okay, this is interesting. So it's very easy to get overawed, but it is just literally a step at a time. And one of the good things that happened is I'm based down in Cornwall, and I love living in Cornwall, wouldn't change it for the world. But pre-COVID, it's very remote, Cornwall. That's what makes it charming. That's what makes it nice to live in. But it's a hell of a distance from anywhere. It's an hour and a half just to get to Exeter. We have no motorways in Cornwall. And then all of a sudden lockdown came, and everybody goes on these things called Zoom and Team, which quite frankly, I've never heard of. I'm not very techie, personally. And I'd never heard of Zoom before lockdown, but everybody goes online and everybody goes on these things called Zoom. And then I start networking, and all of a sudden it was people, from London, from upcountry, from London, from Edinburgh, from Manchester, Birmingham. Then you went to, people in Paris, people in Germany, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Florida, Toronto, Dubai. And obviously for a business like ours, where we're helping clients move funds abroad to pay suppliers or pay overseas offices or pay overseas shareholders or what have you, making payments in a foreign currency. Or, and this has been the big growth area, and that's the traditional side of the business, helping importers and exporters, making payments abroad. What's really taken off since COVID, Charlie, is receiving funds from abroad, because it's never been easier, because of everybody going online, it's never been easier to have overseas clients. The problem is that the banking system has not kept up. My biggest competitors now don't even have a telephone number on their website. So the client is on their own. And if you can be a very experienced business person, but if your background is in the UK, or the only banking system you understand is the UK one, which revolves around a sort code and account number combination, and we're the only country in the world that has that combination. So all of a sudden you're sending payments abroad, okay, and there's always that feeling that you press that button and the money goes out of your account in the UK, and then 3 days later your supplier in Hong Kong or Australia or Canada or wherever sends you a nasty message saying, "Where's my money?" And you go, "Well, I've sent it." And then you go back on the platform and there isn't even a telephone number. Now what do you do? So the idea behind Cosmos is very simple. I started my career in 1985 in the city of London. In those days, of course, it was way before computers and the internet and the email and credit systems and what have credit, scoring. So the only way to do business back then was the way business had been done for hundreds of years, and that's by humans talking to one another and resolving situations. It was a time I feel very privileged, because I started, as a 19-year-old kid from a council estate in the East End of London, not knowing much about anything. The only thing, why did I choose banking? I'm good at maths. And I thought, well, it's finance. probably be able to travel abroad. Might be able to work for myself one day. It's universal, you know. That
I
was
mean,
really,
that's
nothing more
quite forward
scientific than
thinking,
that.
you
Nothing
know?
more scientific than that whatsoever. But I was lucky in that I caught the last generation of bank managers when bank managers were bank managers. And so I spent the first 10 years of my career going to university in the evenings, working full time during the day, and being very, very junior staff for some real bank managers and seeing how they interacted with clients and how they dealt with clients. And that's always sort of stayed with me. In the last 20 years, most financial services, but especially currency exchange, has gone completely tech mad. It's all about the algorithm. It's all about the platform. It's all about the app. And as I said earlier, so much so that some of my biggest competitors don't even have a telephone number anymore. And so the idea of Cosmos is that, yes, we use the technology because we have to in order to facilitate the transaction for the client, but it's all about the relationship. It's all about not having one size that fits all, because what I found is that one size doesn't fit anybody well. It's about speaking to the client directly, finding out about them, their requirements, their background, their attitude to risk, their cash flow, and then putting together a currency payment or currency receipt solution that is unique to them, and then managing that for them. And
Um,
it's worked really, really well.
and that's really, really great to hear. And I want to absolutely dig in to how global payments, how can a business owner utilize global payments, what things to be looking for, what challenges to be heading into, and how they can apply it. But but first, I just want to dig into what's the value of you knowing what the old way of the banking managers and the processes is, like how they operated, and why you felt that's so important now for this new technology era. And if I give you some like context, for example, I've always delivered. I had this conversation yesterday actually. I've always delivered LinkedIn lead generation services, and it's kind of the parallel is I started that 10 years ago when there wasn't any technology around LinkedIn. This concept of social selling and conversational marketing was very, very much in its infancy. And I only happened to have stumbled on it by accident because I'm a nerd in psychology. Uh, and the change in LinkedIn is that there's been an influx of technology around LinkedIn and the selling process, so that the output is that people who don't understand the psychology and the theory and the context of selling with the platform now has created this explosion of spam and into the marketplace, and this distaste of distrust around LinkedIn. And so it's created this monster, for example. But I know every person that I've met who's been doing LinkedIn for about 10 years or older or more, they all understand this social selling concept because they had to do it manually at the start, and they had that time to learn and understand the nuances of what does work and what doesn't work, and they don't lean on the crutch of automation and technology. Does that make
Exactly
sense?
right. Yeah, no, spot on. Absolutely spot on. That's exactly right, because technology has moved on so quickly, so fast, that there are so many automated systems now, and it's all very clever. But nothing, at the end of the day, we're social animals. And the reason why I think it's so important is I felt before I started Cosmos, that there was a gap in the market. I believed there was a gap in the market. Having started in 2020, we're now in our fourth financial year. The only thing that's really changed, Charlie, is now I know there's a gap in the market. And the reason why, without being, in the least bit arrogant or complacent or anything at all, is a very competitive market. As I said earlier, the world is not short of currency payment solution options. Clients are spoiled for choice, particularly in the UK, where, in countries like where you are in the States and Canada and Australia, a handful of banks still dominate 90% of the market. In the UK, there's 655 banks just in a square mile of the City of London, yet all the banks control less than 50% of the currency market. So it's a very competitive market. So clients are very spoiled for choice in the UK. There are lots and lots of choices. It's not what we do. What we do, lots of people do, as I mentioned earlier. It's not difficult these days to move funds from one account to another, even involving an exchange of currency. There are multitudes of options. The how we do it is a bit different, but the real difference is the why we do it. And the why we do it is that, quite frankly, in my last 15, 20 years of career, I started getting a bit fed up of going into work, having morning meetings where management would tell the traders about the importance of how customers were, of customer service, and then seeing how customers really were treated. And despite the advances in technology, my best business in a 35-year career always came from word of mouth referrals. Always. And that made me think that that's the one thing that technology is never going to change. And one of the few things I know about, SEO and pay-per-click campaigns and all the rest of it is that if you're not in the top half of page one, there's no point in being there. Now, having worked for some big banks and the major currency brokers, I know the budgets involved in being in the top half of page one. So you either compete with that, or you just don't pick a fight that you're not going to win, and you go in a different direction. And one of the things I'm really proud of what we're putting together at Cosmos is we're now in our fourth trading year. We've never spent a penny on pay-per-click. We don't market. We don't advertise. We've never have. All our business comes from repeat and referrals. And that's important because it means that how do you get repeat business? How do you get referral business? You get repeat business by looking after people so that people get confident in dealing with you. And then once you get that confidence, you work hard to keep that confidence up, and then they'll happily refer. And the beauty of that is that one of the things that I absolutely detested doing in the early part of my career is cold calling. I hate, my first job consisted of a desk, a telephone number, a telephone, and a copy of the Yellow Pages. That's how I started. And I detested it with a passion. Absolutely hated it, Whereas now I'm very pleased because all that happens is I get a referral and I ring that person up and say, hello, my name's Tony from Cosmos Currency Exchange, and your friend, your cousin, your boss, your whoever has asked me to give you a call. And that's how the conversation starts.
If we
it works.
Summarise, that's what you've learned from the kind of the old, let's call it the old traditional way,
yes.
is rather these brands who have just kind of gone out as a brand with no face and this. I can only generalize a little bit because everybody's customer support in a business is very wildly different. That's a whole specialism within itself. And because now, for context for people who don't know, because I also work in this industry, and I've seen a huge improvement in the technology that captures how we do global payments and being able to interchange it between the different account systems and checking systems and IBANs and KYC, KYB, like really get into the technology around it. But it's now because it's become so advanced that it has become so much more readily available to the mass market. Like you said, you can go to anybody. But when when it's such sensitivity, money in a business is its lifeline. And to have that level of trust to be able to send money to different locations and know that there is somebody who can handhold you through that process, especially at the start,
Absolutely.
a really added value. And I want to turn this, like I mentioned before, I want to turn this to the business owner. We've seen this shift of global work, like how businesses worked before COVID and after COVID. It's two different scenarios in my head. I'm funny. I will put myself in this bracket. I'm talking to you from New York, and you're from Cornwall. And this is the beauty of it now. This is the world that we live in. And right, it does then. The banks, for context for people, why the banks are so slow is because if you are so big and you have such big, massive legacy systems, it's so hard for it to be agile and move as a business, because as soon as you change one thing in a business as big as a big bank, huge chain reaction, which arguably takes 5 to 10 years, but the banks now don't have 5 to 10 years. No, and if people want to know, again, it's just trying to bring people up to speed on like what's happening in the industry. We have things like Monzo, we have things like Wise, we have things like these top-up cards called neobanks, because the banks are moving so slow. And this is, I'm talking about consumer side right now. This is the everyday person. So now we talk to the everyday the business. So we have 95% of the UK is small businesses. They can't spend all this money on a system themselves. They have to rely on people like you, Tony, to give them the service. Now, what's the first thing a business should think about when starting to work globally? Especially on the finance side.
To me, you can get very technical about cash flows and projections and research and all the rest of it, and it's all important. I'll tell you the biggest thing that I've found time and again and makes the crucial difference. Forget about you. Forget about, I need to forget. Every morning I tell myself, forget Cosmos. Help the client succeed. The more the client succeeds, the more we will succeed. But that way around. And that sounds very trite and, and naive and Boy Scoutish and all the rest of it. And I've been called all kinds of things throughout my long career, pre-Cosmos. But it's true because, again, going back to 2020, everybody goes online. All of a sudden, I think this is good because I'm now networking without leaving my home. I'm now networking throughout the world. And within 6 months, by the sort of third lockdown, the feedback I was getting was businesses saying, yeah, it's great. It's never been easier to find clients abroad, but it's keeping them that's really hard. So you dig a little bit deeper and you go, what do you mean? Well, and a typical example, a British manufacturer goes networking, finds a client in California. Client in California loves the product, wants to do business, does business for a couple of months, gives up on it. Why? Because making that payment every month to the UK is a nightmare. Why? Because you're asking their US client to send dollars outside the United States to a UK-based dollar account. Online banking in the States does exist if you deal with the Wells Fargos and Bank of, but it only works domestically. If you want to send dollars out of the United States, outside of the country, you physically have to go into a bank branch. Well, during the lockdown, the banks were shut. Now what do? So it's the way we started to succeed and survive 2020 and going into 2021 was by finding solutions for our clients. The solution that we provided in that instance was to be able to get rid of as many pain points as possible. What do I mean? The first pain point is if that British client wants to open up a dollar account, that's fine. Go to any high street bank, they'll do them for you. But they're not going to do it for nothing. There's going to be fees involved. There's going to be charges involved. There's going to be monthly fees involved. There's going to be paperwork involved. Well, we're the currency brokers. So when a client registers with us, they don't need their own dollar account and euro account and Swiss franc account. That's what we're here for. So that's pain point number one out of the way. Pain point number two is we have local collection accounts. So whenever somebody says to me, I have clients in the United States, we have a dollar account in New York. So that invoice now goes out to the client in California, not for them to pay the dollars to the UK, but for them to make the dollars to New York, which means they can use online banking free of charge, don't have to go physically into the bank branch. So that's pain point number 2 out of the way. Pain point number 3 is the technology is very clever, but the trouble with fully automated systems is that it doesn't reflect what's happening in the marketplace. So at the moment, the dollar is at a multi-week low against the pound. It's a terrible time to sell dollars and buy pounds. Terrible time. It's a great time to buy dollars. It's a terrible time to sell dollars. If you're using one of these very, very clever apps or platforms or what have you, the dollars come in, they'll get converted today, regardless, because there is no human being there. There's no thought process. It's all automated. We've broken that automated chain. So all that will happen is the dollars arrive today. I'll pick up the phone to one of my team will pick up the phone to a client and say, good news, your dollars are in from that client in California. However, it's a really rubbish rate today. Do you need the funds straight away, or can you wait? And if you can wait, how long can you wait? Are we talking days, weeks, or do you just want to do this straight away because of Christmas, or what is your circumstances? So it puts the client back in control of the timing of the transfer, where we can be their eyes and ears in the market. So that's one instance we're starting to help. The other big thing that's really moved our business on, and again, only by helping other people, is of course the B word, Brexit. So a British person selling a property in the European Union, pre-COVID, you've got me talking about COVID now, pre-Brexit, you sell the property, you own the property, let's say you own the property in Spain for argument's sake, you sell the property, you need to move the euros back to the UK. You'd either be physically out in Spain, or you'd phone the bank or communicate with the bank somehow, or your solicitors out there, or whatever the arrangement is. Pre-Brexit, to move the euros back to the UK would normally cost a flat fee of about €20. Then the UK voted for Brexit. On the 31st of January 2021, we left. Now it's outside the single market, and the Spanish banks all of a sudden start charging 1.5%. That's 1.5% of the volume of the transaction. So if you sell a small apartment, €100,000, the bank is going to charge you €1,500 just to do the bank transfer. That doesn't include the conversion cost. So again, I started getting phone calls from ex-clients saying, we're selling a property, all of a sudden they want to charge us €8,000 or €6,000 or whatever the amounts were. Is there a solution? And again, the solution is, yes, there is a solution. And the solution is, let's give the client the easy option of paying into an account still inside the European Union. Then it's seen as a domestic transfer. So we have an account, a euro account in Dublin in Ireland, which is inside the single market. That means the Spanish banking system still sees it as a domestic transfer, and therefore it goes through online free of charge or at a minimal charge. So by helping our clients survive, by helping our clients prosper, by helping those corporate clients, those business clients, we can't help them win the business. We're not marketeers or in social media or anything. But what we can do is help them keep the business this way. And with personal clients, we can help them save time, save money, and find bespoke solutions to make the most out of each transaction because of the timing of it.
Just following on from that, really, because there's a variety of different reasons to what we call retention marketing, what we're speaking about here, and the big one is absolutely removing any friction within your processes and systems. You can apply that to every element and part of a business, and that really goes into the small 1%. I feel like I do say this a lot, but once any business has got through the first 3 years of, I'm going to say chaos, where you've muddled through, you do get to a point in a business where you have different scale-up stages. Let's say the first $500,000. to the first million, to the next 5 million, to the next 10 million. Like, let's call those the typical stages I would point out. And in order to get to those stages, you have to drill down those 1% in every little aspect of your business. And it's not anything glamorous or anything, this magic, this incredible magic thing that's going to massively grow your business overnight. It's the really boring, dull stuff. And from what I'm hearing from you, which could be it could really catch people out, is say, like, I'm just going to use if you're a professional service, you're offering a professional service and you're offering it to, like I said, a European country, or you're offering it to the US, you might be thinking, hey, this is great. I'm selling my service for $5,000. This is great. I'm going to get $5,000. When you're looking at your cash flow, when you're looking at your accounts, your P&L, your revenue streams, like your projections for the next year, you're thinking, oh, that's great. I'm going to get all of this money. No, you're not. And if, like you said, it is every single possible variable is on the wrong side of the equation, which would easily very happen. You could actually be down a few £1,000s on your bottom line, because let's say you have 10 to 15 clients and they're all in the US and they're all getting transferred over. It is that stacking on top of each other of those things that are against you, what actually you could then, I'm just taking like a worst case scenario, you might not have that money in the bank account to pay your tax bill, or you might not have that money to pay your employees, or you might not have that money. I could do this all day. I could do this all day.
Yeah, it's true. Absolutely. Imagine, you've done 6 months work.
Yeah.
You've got into the project and you think, great, I'm going to make $5,000 out of this. That's fantastic. You've then done 6 months work. You get the $5,000. But because you haven't even thought about the implications of the currency exchange markets changing every 3 seconds, night and day, that $5,000 that was worth $5,000 6 months ago might only be worth $3,000 now. Might only be worth $1,000. And you don't even cover your overheads on that project. Now, there are currency strategies that you can do to make sure that $5,000 stays at $5,000, and that's there are certain instruments involved, like forward contracts, and without wishing to get too technical, there are always solutions. Let's get
into the technical.
Sorry.
So let's get into the technical. So what are some of the strategies that the business owner could start to think about in order to protect themselves in this global market?
So the classic one is what's called a forward contract. And that's where you either forward buy or forward sell. With us, you can do that up to 2 years ahead in return for a 10% deposit. Usually, that is negotiable depending on the size of the business and the currency pair involved and the countries involved. But it means that that if you forward, let's say you're buying dollars. Let's say you're a UK importer importing from China or from the US and paying in dollars. It's the best time in 12, 13 weeks to buy dollars. So you could get better, but it's the best time for 12 weeks. So if you lock it in now, you know exactly how much you're going to have to pay for those dollars today. And it's not going to get any worse for you because you've locked it in. And you don't even have to pay the equivalent of $5,000 out of your cash flow. You only pay 10%. When you need the money, now there are things called fixed forward contracts, but I don't deal with them because I think they're not right for the client. My experience is that...
Why is that?
Because if something happens like life and the date changes, you can't break a fixed term contract. So if you book it 6 months ahead, and all of a sudden in month 4 you want to pay that for whatever reason, you've got to wait 2 months. Or you have to break the contract, and guess who wins out of that? It's not you, it's the bank. Okay? It's the casino always wins. A house always wins. So we always deal just with flexible forward contracts, where you've got an end date, But at any point from the day after you book the contract to the end date, you can draw down. So you can phone up in month 4 and say they want to get it's happened a lot quicker. I finished the project quicker, and or they've manufactured it quicker, and I need to make the payment quicker. No problem. Give us 24 hours notice. We'll do the sums, send you out the bill. You send me the sterling, I'll send the dollars out. That's it. So it's totally flexible. So that's one option. The other option that I use a lot at Cosmos is what's called a hedging strategy. And the hedging strategy is, look, I have an economics degree. I have 38 years experience in the industry. And the one thing I can guarantee you is that nobody can read the market. And anybody that tells you they can read the market is kidding themselves. It's just impossible. And the reason it's impossible is that when I was a lad, many years ago, economics was by far the most important factor in the markets, followed by politics, followed by sentiment. Now it's the other way around. There is so much hot money in the markets. Bear in mind, the currency markets turns over $7.5 trillion a day. A day. $7.5 trillion a day. Now, all of a sudden, we're in a world where the most important factor is sentiment. Speculation, basically. Then economics, then politics. Sometimes politics and then economics. So there are trends, like this week has been a completely manic week. We've had central bank interest rate announcements from the Fed, from the Bank of England, from the European Central Bank, from Norwegians, from the Swiss. We've had data out of China, we've had major data out of the US and the UK. It's been completely manic week. And of course that has a bearing. And politics has a bearing. But sentiments and speculation has gone from single figures to market dominance. And that is just completely an impossible call to make. If you get it right, it's potluck. It's not strategy, it's not cleverness. It just happens that the stars are aligned for you. So one of the things I use a lot is hedging. And a hedge is simple. A hedge is, I used a hedge, yesterday for a client where clients in Germany, been in Germany many years, but is Australian by birth, retiring back to Australia, wants to put funds out to Australia to have funds to buy property in Australia ready for his retirement, registered, sent the euros in, and I said to him at the beginning of the week, if the Fed on Wednesday night talk about interest rate cuts, there's going to be an almighty spike in risk appetite in the markets. Because regardless, now you might say, but hold on, he's selling euros and buying Australian dollars. What's the Fed got to do with it? The reason the Fed's got to do with it is the dollar represents 71% of all currency trades, involves the US dollar. So anything out of the United States is market dominant. Always. Always has been, always will be. It makes me smile that when I go back to 1985 and they were talking about the demise of the dollar and 38 years later, they're still talking about the demise of the dollar, and the dollar still represents 71% of the market share. So the dollar's king.
It is king. And in fairness, if you look at the dollar of the value over the last 125 years, you take a big macro picture, it is because it's doing this downward.
Yes, it is.
Downward trend.
Its purchasing power is downwards.
Yeah, exactly. But you just got to remember there's a few more variables in comparison. It's like who you're comparing it to, with the relativity of that. So yeah, we could always spin that narrative, but
it's like when people talk about the demise of the US economy. Hold on, the Californian economy by itself is bigger than the UK's. It's bigger than France's. It's the 4th biggest in the world, and that's just California. So US.
For people in context, I'm in New York, and just on Manhattan Island alone, there is 6.5 million people. Now, Manhattan Island is about 4 miles, right? 4 miles tall. Okay, that's how big it is. You think about obviously a level of concentration in certain areas of America. It is quite literally 100 times bigger, and when you have volume, you have more money, you have far more of economy power against anything else. So, and
Exactly.
one thing I want to obviously kind of close and finish up on here, because we've been talking about like the technology into the future, and why business owners should be really starting to get switched on with these changes in these external technology factors that's going to affect their business. And I always sometimes like to say a little bit of history just to contextualize why this is all happening. Now, we all know I use the iPhone as an example. The technology of just our general laptops and our phones have gone from a brick, quite literally. You were talking about in the 80s where everything was still so analog that 125 years before that, it was pretty much the same. And so you've got to really appreciate over a 40-year, 30-year period of how technology is incredibly advanced. But we haven't mentioned the 2008 crash and actually why this was so pinnacle to attitude change. Because in the 2000, so you were in. I presume you were still in. Yeah, you were still in London in the 2008 crash, and you've got to remember the perspective of that time was the banking in London in the UK was seen as the gold standard, as the heart, the hub of a lot of financial institutions around the globe. Like it was like the Milan and Paris of fashion. We really want to contextualize it. And the point of it all is obviously with New York also going down, another Wall Street being a hub. The trust from consumers of mass population, there was a big cascade of mistrust. Like it was like we had this centralized point of like, you look after our money and do the best practices, and that dissipated that day. And so the visceral reaction from it was the people who had enough brains were like, let's make a new currency, let's make a new era of how we deal with finances. And this is why we have NFTs. This is why we have cryptocurrencies. This is why we have narratives around a global currency. I do hear people buzzing around me at the moment, like we're going for a global currency to everybody to be on this level playing field in this new world that we live in. And so I do recommend anybody who is interested in this to go and read the history, because there's a ton more. I'm just doing the top level of it, but that was, I always had to give the why. And then there's my two recommendations, and I'd love to hear your recommendations. If you want the entertaining form of all of this stuff, there's obviously there's the big film. I can't remember it. I think the film's gone out on the top of my head now. I'll have to put it into the caption descriptions below. But there's
Wolf of Wall Street or Margin
absolutely
Call?
Not. No, it's definitely the one about the crash in Wall Street, but definitely not Wolf of Wall Street. I'll definitely put it into the captions. But the other one is obviously Interested.
I know what you mean. It's the book was written by Michael Lewis.
Yeah, and it's really entertaining.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
So the documentary one is obviously the GameStop documentary. That is very fascinating because they do go into far more obviously the stocks and markets, shorting and hedging and etc. And then the other one, I do happen to have this book by my side actually. It's called Girls Just Want to Have Funds. This is a really good one. Obviously, this got targeted to me because I'm a female entrepreneur, and it is about for me female investing, but it applies to absolutely any gender that you identify with. But it gives you the top level on absolutely anything from interest rates to tax to managing your own funds, managing global funds, crypto, everything. It just gives you that glossary of stuff. So that's one of my personal favourites. Is there anything that you have where you recommend to business owners to go read and kind of do these stepping stones into this world?
I'm a complete bookworm. I've been all my life. So I just read and read and read and read. So I read a lot. But I think if you're not a bookworm, I would say a good option, or two good options, will be either podcasts, where you can learn a lot of information, and there's a huge variety of choice and some quite technical to generalist and everything in between. So podcasts can be a good way of getting quite a lot of learning in. Certainly, I've found that online networking has been a tremendous university for me because I started Cosmos after 35 years career, but I always worked for other people. And I always worked at the top end of the industry where they had specific departments. And then you launch by yourself and you're dealing with things that you know theory about because you've been around the business world or you got your business degree or MBA or whatever it is, but you've never had to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And then you go online networking and you meet somebody who, is a specialist in LinkedIn or social media or doing, hosting your own podcast or writing your own book or whatever the case may be. So I found that a tremendous university. If you are a bookworm, I mean, there's so many excellent books out there. But two of my favorites are Company of One by Paul Jarvis, which I think is a very good book, very well put together as to how, because of technology, but if you marry technology with something more real, you can compete with the big boys without having to. Basically, Company of One is about why growth for growth's sake is not a good idea. It's not anti-growth, but growth for the sake of, I've got a £10 million company instead of an £8 million company.
Yeah.
That's fine. But, I was recommended this book again, and it made me smile because I remember one of my first jobs in the city of London. And, I remember my first boss, who still is by far the biggest influence ever in my career. A great guy, sadly, long departed, but a really, really great guy. And one of the sort of examples he always used to use is, there is, you think somebody who's a millionaire and everybody goes, wow. Well, what nobody asks is what the debts are, because you might be worth $1 million, but if you owe 1.1 million, you're as destitute or you're more destitute than somebody who's got $100 but only owes 80.
Yeah.
And that, it's a bigger scale of that. And the other book that I think is excellent is Simon Sinek's Start With Why.
Yeah.
Where, he talks about the why of everything as opposed to just the how and the what. And I think that's a really excellent book.
That's why I started the podcast with exactly that question. Like, why do you do this business?
Exactly right.
Now, I think that's a perfect place to finish. So people that can reach you, talk to you, connect with you, what is the URL to your website?
www.
Amazing. That's perfect. So people, absolutely, I encourage you to go talk with Tony. It's like we're only skimming the surface of the wealth of knowledge. And like you said, there is so many different things that can catch a business out that we have to be not risk takers. I always say we have to be risk mitigators. And by doing that, you've got to go find the right people, get the right knowledge, and put those controls in place so you can take more ballsy action and go out into the globe. So thank you so much, Tony. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.